Who has slaughtered more people throughout all of history? Governments. That's why these Bitcoiners are connecting the dots. There's just so many similarities between the Christian values, Bitcoin values, libertarian values.
Call a spade a spade. This is where this conversation is going. Government is a rival religion to Christianity.
But nobody talks about that. No pastors talk about it. Nobody's aware of it in the church at large.
If the government just says, okay, well, you can't fund other Christians, other conservatives, we need an alternative system.
This is where I wish there was more libertarianism in the church. What makes it harder is that we've sanctified being economically poor. It's the poverty gospel. Oh, I'm surprised you're so libertarian being a Christian. For me, it's abundantly clear reading scripture. The state is a very bad actor.
We are pleased to be joined this evening or morning, noon, or night, depending on when you're listening to this. Jake Gosselin. Jake is a Bitcoiner, but he also is what we would call more of our just entrepreneur in general, business creator, motivator. He has his own YouTube channel. Connor was actually the one who got in touch with him initially on Twitter, which was great. And we're super pumped that Jake was able to join us. And this is actually our first episode post the holidays. So hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving and all of that good stuff. So Jake, just welcome to the podcast, and let's just get into it. So you're a Bitcoiner, and a lot of your content kind of focuses around the culture of Bitcoin. And you know, I guess just kind of starting out, where did you get into the Bitcoin space, and what was kind of your orange pill moment or your crypto moment in general? Because you're kind of around the same age as me and Connor, and we have all kind of came into this game a little bit differently. So it's always interesting hearing where somebody comes from and how they got involved with the space.
Yeah, I would say my orange pill moment started actually back in around probably 2015. My background was having the intention to but I didn't buy in 2015, so don't
Sure.
get your hopes up.
Okay.
But the philosophy behind how I approach the space and why I have a lot of conviction in Bitcoin, I think it all started back then. And around that time, I was actually in seminary, and I intended to kind of go into full-time ministry as a worship pastor back then. And around that time, I went to a conference called Acton University. Have you guys ever heard of that?
No.
Acton is now I know like a bit more about them after going to that event, but they're like basically a libertarian think tank that they must raise money from a bunch of millionaires and billionaires out there who want to shape the world to help people think with more libertarian values. And I'm appreciative of that because I think practically that's the way the world should be. And they actually funded me as a seminary student to go to this conference, which was a few days of a bunch of academics, which is kind of surprising because academics are usually the statists. But there's academics who were talking about like the problems that big government creates. And it was the first time I learned this idea that, the government actually incentivizes single moms to remain single moms financially and not get married, or else their welfare will be taken away, right? So it doesn't take an advanced degree in sociology or political science to understand, that's probably a net bad for society. And just learning what the government, people might be well-meaning. I don't think everybody in government has this evil plan, but they tend to always do more harm than good.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I started developing these more libertarian ideas where the state should have less and less power. It should be as small as humanly possible. And society will flourish and we'll all be in a better place. And then, of course, COVID was like the major red pill moment, to be like, oh my word, like all the things they're pushing with lockdowns and vaccines and just gaslighting turned up to level 100, 110%. And just it still see a lot of that today as well. But 2020, that's when, by that time, I had been running my own business for a few years and was experiencing a significant amount of success with that. And my business too is actually helping churches with audio visual live streaming, things like that. And 2020 was interesting for my business because a lot of people needed help with that because now churches were shut down. They still need our help, whether they're streaming or just having ABL in person. So we do both of those things. But I mean, I'm in the church world, so I even saw churches, being shut down and not being able to meet in person. And a lot of people were just afraid. And so the combination of that, what I was experiencing with, this kind of philosophy of libertarianism I developed over the years, especially when you start your own business, you quickly become a libertarian because you learn about just all the taxes you have to pay and the regulations out there, and it's just like absurd stuff. Like right now, I'm building out a lot of systems to sell equipment in different states and just do drop shipping. And it's like, I got to get resale certificates and seller's
Mhm.
permits everywhere. And like, why does some bureaucrat in the state of Washington need my information for me to sell something to someone there? Right. It's just a bunch of hoops. It frustrates me just talking about it. So that, and then also being a business owner, you kind of get addicted to building your business, growing your business, adding value to the world. And I start learning. It's like, oh man, I get a lot of fulfillment and joy out of, adding value and building this thing that accumulates value over time. And it's obviously kicking off this profit where now I have this good problem of what do I do with my capital that I accumulated from the profits of a company. Like, where do I put that? So, I have other options. I can start de-risking myself from my business, and that capital can just grow. So eventually I'm retired and I can do other things, right? So all that around 2020, and I was kind of aware of the concept of the Fed and money, the money printer, and all that stuff, and all of us became very aware of that in 2020, how bad it could get when they just massively and quickly expanded the money supply. And that's when it was somewhere around November 2020. I have a younger cousin. He's a great guy named Liam. He studied finance, and at the time, this is a few years ago, so I think he was maybe 20 years old or something like that. I was 30 years old. And he's the one who's like, Jake, you really gotta like look into Bitcoin here. And like, he kind of got me down that rabbit hole, even though I'd briefly, heard of Bitcoin before years ago. But this time I'm like, okay, I actually have this problem, and Bitcoin really is the solution of just like, where can I save my money, my monetary energy, right? And then the really the more significant orange pill moment was listening to a Michael Saylor interview around that time in December 2020. Yeah, December 2020. I think it was him and Raoul Pal, Mr. Crypto Boy Extraordinaire, right? and and I still like Raoul. I think, again, crypto for the most
Yeah.
part, I feel like a lot of it's a waste of time, unless you like trading. But the listening to that interview in Michael Saylor explaining Bitcoin from his perspective as an engineer, and how our monetary system is a failure when it comes to engineering it well. It's like it's engineered to leak 2% every year, and it often leaks more than that, right? Of its energy, or however you want to refer to it. So that was like the big orange pill for me. That's when I was like, yep, this is something I'm going to start saving in. And yeah, that's 3 years ago, and not a whole lot has changed other than I become probably more of a threat to democracy at this point, and I'm more of a religious extremist. I'm more of a Bitcoiner. I'm more of all the things that they don't want to happen. And I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, completely joking, of course, right?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I mean, until you're doing forums on 4chan, I think you'll be okay. So, um, yeah, no, but that's good stuff. Appreciate the the additional context and background there, because it helps to just kind of, where this conversation will branch off. So one thing that I was curious about, so glad we just kind of put the libertarian, notion out there right from the jump, because I definitely noticed um, that theme in your content on your channel specifically, and it's interesting because you come at it with a Christian approach, where a lot of libertarians wouldn't even, some libertarians wouldn't even broach the subject of religion. So it's like, how does, what's that balancing act like in your life, or in your viewpoints in general? Because um, I kind of agree with you, and I disagree with you at the same time with some things, but I think I agree with you more than I disagree with you, if that kind of makes sense.
Hmm.
Well, I think the disagreements are kind of what helps. And you know what I really
Yeah.
appreciated about you, Jake, when I first asked you to come on the podcast, you said, "Yeah, let's do it, but fair warning, I'm a toxic Bitcoin maximalist." And I'm like, great, let's go.
Yeah.
I really appreciate strong opinions. And one thing I really loved about what you said about your journey there was you were watching during COVID, churches getting shut down, people getting debanked, all these issues that go in. And this is what draws you to Bitcoin. It's like a solution to these very real problems. And we've interviewed a bunch of builders in the space, mostly Bitcoin people, to be honest. But we've done, crypto conversion. Obviously, we are somewhat of a crypto podcast as well.
We're
Anybody who's
crypto agnostic.
building, we talk to AI people too. I would really say we're more of like an emerging tech
Yeah.
podcast. But what I really appreciate about all of these people that we get on, all Christians for the most part, is they're in this space for very real reasons,
Hmm.
And I talk to a lot of people in Bitcoin and crypto that are just here to make money, and as much as I love making money, my value system, comes before that. And that's really what I think. I, I just think Christians are naturally Bitcoiners because we're like the realest Bitcoiners. We know how important, this technology is for, the survival of families and of faith and, all these things that we really hold dear. So yeah, I,
Hmm.
I love people that have strong views and strong opinions because it's like that's a real person.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. It's like you mentioned, like, yeah, people being in it for making money, and because fortunately my business does well and I do make plenty of money with it. I've also made enough money so far to learn. It's like, you know, the money, obviously it's not like it's not going to bring the ultimate fulfillment and satisfaction. Cause I mean, I do think there's some baseline, and it might be different for other people about how much income you need, and assets to like make sure you can survive and your family can thrive. But I don't know. I think that's where in the Bitcoin crypto world, it is easy for people to kind of get sucked into the like, oh, number go up. This is just like a quick rich, thing, and then we'll go on our merry way into GameStop or something like that, or some other meme stock that's out there. Um, but yeah, that's why it is. And that's actually, as a Christian, maybe the only thing I sometimes am concerned about how much I think about Bitcoin is it almost gets a little too religious sometimes. I'm like, oh, is this competing with, in any way with the kingdom of God, or is this actually um, a way that the kingdom of God is making its way into finance? That's sometimes I like to think about that a little bit, and just be careful about that.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that always, I don't know, I wouldn't say it sets off alarms to me, but my one critique, I guess, of the Bitcoin space is that I do kind of feel like, people who are super deep into it, some of these people, Bitcoin is the most important thing to them. And as
Mhm.
much as I think Bitcoin is great. I think the technology is, absolutely incredible. It's revolutionary. Um, there's a hierarchy, I guess, of values there. Jordan
Mhm.
Peterson is famous for talking about, right, hierarchical value structures. But at the top of that hierarchy, for me, being a Christian is the church and this mission that we're called to here in life. And so I'm always afraid of that getting flipped. And
Yep. Yep.
talking to Christians, and I'll say this too. I think sometimes Christians kind of get subsumed into this kind of thought, and specifically well, Matt's not here today, but Matt and I have talked about this a number of times and we agree on this point. But as much as I want to tell Christians about Bitcoin so that they can benefit from all these things that Bitcoin, offers us, I also want to tell like Bitcoiners about Christianity. And I think we need more Christians in Bitcoin, not just for the benefits that it's going to bring the church, but also for the benefit that Christians are going to bring to Bitcoin, which is, we actually care about these decentralized values. We care about, to see Bitcoin really accomplish what it's meant to do and not get, overtaken by competing interests.
Yeah,
So I almost feel like Christians can bring more to Bitcoin than Bitcoin can really bring to Christians.
because that's the thing, Connor. It's like it's the same consensus that like the pilgrims brought to the Netherlands when they were there. The king of the Dutch didn't want the pilgrims to leave, but the pilgrims were like, no, we need to go back to England. They were completely different cultures. It is similar to like Christians and Bitcoin, but because the way they lived their life and they had big families and they were thriving citizens, that by the time they told the Dutch, hey, we're going, and the leadership was trying to do everything, stay, 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 they were like, no, God's calling us to leave. And so then they left. But it initially there was so much apprehension when they came into that space. They didn't want the locale and the leadership didn't want them to be included. But then they saw the belligerence that their natives were bringing to their culture, and how these outsiders had improved so many things because all of a sudden there was functionality to society because there was values and virtue being practiced. It changed the whole way they looked at it. And I think we could see a similar thing in Bitcoin, but I just don't know how to get, pull the Christian populace into it, because there's definitely a technological and an age gap combination of it, which I think is
The
one
only
of the
people,
hindrances.
the only Christians who really care about Bitcoin at this point are the ones who have a capital preservation problem, like the ones
Okay.
who literally. It sounds harsh, but like if none of my poor friends are excited about Bitcoin. You know what I mean? Like if they're
Mm.
Christian, and there are, and like what makes it harder is that in the church we've kind of sanctified the idea of being economically poor. Like that's like it's almost like it's the poverty gospel, right? Where like,
Yep.
hey, you're closer to God if you are economically, like financially poor. Like that's a good thing. And if you're financially wealthy, that's a bad thing, where it's just like really horrible reading of scripture. Um, it's a whole other tangent we can get down as
Yeah,
well,
I was
because
about to
it's
say
not
we
it's
can
not
talk about beatitudes later. Yeah.
it's not poverty. It's not, we don't want poverty gospel. We don't want prosperity gospel. Right. So that's why, I don't know, when I try to talk to, I talk to my pastors and all that stuff, and like great guys, but they'll even say it's like they're pastors. Like they don't have a capital preservation problem because there's not much capital. Right. And that's what Bitcoin is solving the most right now. That's why guys like Saylor, who are sitting on so much stinking money, uh, get it, right? And he's going to put it away. I wish he was a Christian, but he's
Yeah.
not, but even the guys in the Christian space, like I bet like a Robert Breedlove, I think he has a pretty successful finance and a background in finance. So like he needs that. I feel like that if everybody were honest, like that's one of the big things. And I mean, the other thing is like there are guys who maybe are legitimately more passionate about just the ethics of money, and they're Christians, and they're like, yeah, like this is ethically a better solution. Right. Um, but
Yeah. I think you're right, and I think that's why whenever I'm talking to Christians, I never go for the money angle, because
mm,
yeah, it's capital preservation, but if a lot of people just don't care about that, and it is what it is. But
yeah,
for me, like the biggest thing that I can go for is like what happened with the Canadian trucker protest, right? It's like,
yeah,
okay,
Yep.
they're going to go
freedom.
do something, and then the banks just cut off those payment rails. And as Christians, we recognize, so many of fellow brothers and sisters in these different organizations, a lot of them up there in the Canadian truckers protest. And if the government just says, okay, well, you can't fund other Christians, other conservatives, like we need an alternative system. Like we can see how the US dollar is basically a weapon.
The issue though is, and this is where I wish there was more libertarianism in the church, because Christians will be like, oh well, the government, like they're the good guys, like those truckers must be the bad guys, like that there must be a good reason why the state is trying to censor them, right? Like it's for our safety, it's for the common good, and like that's that's where I think we talked earlier, or Brandon, you asked earlier about like, oh, I'm surprised like you're so libertarian being a Christian. And for me, it's abundantly clear reading scripture that the state is a very bad actor. Like
Yep.
literally, again, as someone like you look at the Old Testament and, you know, God's like, hey, you're my people. I'll be your king. Just listen to what I say. I will literally write it down on tablets for you. And you just have to follow the directions. And then people are like, no, we want a king. Like, give us a real king. And he's like, are you sure the king, the government's going to come take all your stuff and make your life miserable? And they're like, yes, like something about our sinful nature. We're just like, we just want to put ourselves in that situation of being enslaved by authoritarian evil rulers. Right. And even go the New Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what I was about to say. It couldn't be even
Christ.
more abundantly clear in the New Testament with the Roman Empire
Yeah.
basically running
Yeah.
everything.
Right. Right. Everything is like, it's like literally even from chapter 1 of Luke of Jesus's birth, like the fact that some emperor somewhere is like, hey, we need a census. So I need all of you guys to stop what you're doing and go back to your hometown so I can count you. It's like, what the heck is that? Like, and we just gloss over those passages because we don't really read them in their historical context and how ridiculous that was. And the sad thing is today people do the same thing. Like the same decree of obeying a census mandate is the same thing of following a mask mandate or lockdown mandate or something like that.
Yep.
People aren't thinking critically about how negative an impact this can have with government overreach and who has slaughtered more people throughout all of history? Governments. Like governments are the bad guys, whether it's genocide, war, everything. So that's where it's like, it's really, it's hard for me to understand. Like, obviously, there's some aspects of the Libertarian Party platform that are like, oh yeah, sexual ethics. Like, we don't care. Everybody do what they want to do. Or like, uh, they tend to be more pro-choice. But it's like, well, what about the liberty of the baby who's being murdered here? Like that doesn't seem very libertarian to support the fetus, right? To not support the life of the fetus. So to me, it's pretty, when you just start looking at it like scripture and you think some basic political uh, thought about it and what makes sense, it's like, oh, libertarianism makes a whole lot of sense from a Christian perspective, because ultimately, even theologically, of like the king, think about the kingdom of God, the what Christ has brought to the world in my, yeah, what Christ has brought to the world is like, hey, God can now rule and reign in the hearts of men. It's like, why? It's almost a decentralizing concept when you think about it. It's like, why do we need, if God can transform our hearts, why do we need all these governments kind of bearing down on us, telling us like how to conduct ourselves or what we can and can't do? So I almost think like the kingdom of God. That's why so many. I think so, that's why these Bitcoiners are so passionate about this, in connecting the dots. Like thank God for Bitcoin guys, stuff like that, is because there's just so many similarities there between the Christian values, Bitcoin values, libertarian values.
So you call yourself more of a libertarian. I think I'll refer to myself more as a constitutionalist. But I think we're thinking the same things, because when I look at the documents that the founding fathers put together, they set such a high standard that even they couldn't follow. So I feel like we're more in line with the way we think about it. I just think about it in terms of the ramifications of when, for us, being limited in our, we're Americans. It's like, how do we just get back to that standard? And it definitely, like, the government has definitely turned into of religion for people. Let's just call a spade a spade. This is where this conversation is going. Government is a rival religion to Christianity right now. That's what's
Yep.
happening in the world, especially as we see,
But nobody talks about that. No,
no,
no
no,
pastors,
nobody
no
talks about
pastors
it.
talk about it. Nobody's aware of it in the
And
church
people
at
really
large.
should, because all of that stuff, I'm going to do it right now. I shouldn't really say this on the podcast. I'll probably get banned from YouTube. LGBTQ, BLM, it's all rival religions. That's what it is at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And people need to start accepting that. And I guess this is the perfect podcast to really start opening this can of worms, Connor. But I'm going to go there because that's how I've always really felt about this, especially since 2020.
Yeah.
But even more so as of late, because it's been infiltrating education systems and, the perfect time to talk about education, actually, and just polluting society as a whole. So if this episode is going to go political, I might as well just go full right red wing if I have to. But yeah, you already, Connor, you already knew I was like this. I just have been saying it without hitting record, but we might as well just call it out. Like, I guess I do fall in the same camp as Jake then. So, all right,
Hmm.
call it what you want.
No, I
Yep.
don't think that's that crazy of a thought. And
No,
I'll say this: I'm not a libertarian for a variety of reasons, but I would say I have a very deep seated frustration with a lot of libertarians because I think they're a little distracted with just not taking power, I guess, to put it lightly. I think the government is a problem, but I think it's primarily a problem because we don't have Christians in power. So I almost think I'm probably a little more extreme than you are, Branden, on this.
that's fine.
But it did take me a second to connect the dots. But the Acton Institute, Branden, partnered with Matt Pinto to put on the Catholic Crypto Conference.
Oh, those
Stephen
guys are great.
Barrows, I don't know if he's the president over there at the. Do you know this name, Jake?
It sounds familiar, but I
He
know
was
who
one
you're
of the
talking
keynote
about.
speakers and
Yeah.
from the Acton Institute.
Yeah, yeah, they do. Their Acton does a lot, like a
Yeah.
lot of things. Like yeah, like last year, there was like some like random small business fair for kids at a local park here where I'm at in Florida. I'm like, oh, that's a really cool event. Like, who the heck put this on? It's like Acton. It's like, oh, no wonder. It's like all these cool things happening.
Yeah.
It's great that they're behind it. But but the problem is I would push back because even with the with more Christians in power, obviously I'm not going to be
Mm.
um to me it's like there's just going to be less power. Like that's or we just have to the federal government needs to be functionally as weak in almost pointless as our president is Mr. Joe Biden, right? Like it's just like
Mm.
he kind of personifies that well, but the government is still bloated and with bureaucrats and stuff like
Mm.
that. And that's where again, because a libertarian standpoint, it's like federal government should be like the least powerful, and then states can have a little bit more, and then the locally, that's where like your local politics should have the most influence over your life. But in the U.S., we completely have that flipped.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, again, I agree. Like it would be great if there's more Christians who are in these positions of power. But then again, isn't Joe Biden's a Christian? There's all sorts of
Joe
Christians, and it's like
Biden's a
it's hard.
Catholic. Joe
Yeah,
Biden's
he's a Catholic.
practicing Catholic, Jake.
Yeah, right, right. So what's going on, right? It's like the uh, I do think that's actually I think the Acton motto is power corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I
Mm.
forgot. Wait, is that the guy who said it, Lord Acton or something like? It might have
Oh, is
been
that where they
named
get the
after
name
that
from?
guy. I think that's what. Yeah, I think that's the guy who they got the name from.
Okay.
Um, and I don't know. I just think there's something fundamental to human nature that we are just not very good at like lording over other people. Like, other than like you gotta lord over you gotta figure out yourself and your family and and maybe some super local like community around you can lead. But man, like people who think that they can go to Washington DC and fix all the problems and provide solutions, like they are delusional.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of in the point, or maybe in like kind of a catalyst moment where no matter how many checks and balances you put in place to try to distribute the weight as evenly as possible, it's never going to be the balance is never going to be perfect. It'll always kind of go in one direction or the other. There's no real and that'll probably go without saying for any government that ever gets created for the rest of mankind, because that's just our nature. We always are craving more power, more money, more whatever it is that we crave, and that's just a part of our humanity.
Well, and I again, I will bring it back to Bitcoin. To me, the quickest solution to all of the government dysfunction is getting the money system right and getting us to some sort of standard where we can't just constantly produce more and more debt like the government does, because that all the debt and all the credit expansion, that's what funds all of the nonsense and the over bloated federal government and all the junk that they come up with for policies. Um, because they have an infinite money printer.
Hmm.
So, I mean, to me, it's the solution is like we need to go through the pain, the short term pain of going back to, well, ideally be Bitcoin standard, some sort of standard, gold or Bitcoin, right? Hopefully just Bitcoin, and like go through the deflationary pain we'd have to go through or whatever to make it happen, and then and deal with it. And then society is going to be better off in the long run. But the
I
chances of
don't
that
think I don't
happening are
think
so tiny.
I don't think anybody like Powell or anybody though is has the stones to actually do that. You know, that's the thing is like, will we ever find somebody who's like, all right, we need to wash our hands and actually like get out of this muck that we've put ourselves in. I think since 2008, it has just been, and even before then, it's just gotten deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole, and it's just going to keep going that way because there's too many hands in the cookie jar, and they one person upsets the apple cart, and then everybody just starts, gosh, I'm not gonna swear, but you know what I mean. It's just like that's the concern, and I think like they always kind of push, and then it's like, oh, don't get too carried away, and then it's just like push, and then yield back. So it's all over the board, and I think like one of the things that you kind of talked about earlier, the taxation without representation has just been something that's been irking me a lot lately too. And it's funny because we see all these Gen Z videos opening up their first paycheck and seeing how much of it's getting taken out. It's I hope that there's some mind share taking over with that, because it would it would really help from a younger generation standpoint to just be like, to heck with this, like what is the point of doing anything, and just completely just dismantling what the conventional corporate work system is in this country. And but
Mhm.
that would just be interesting. I don't know if that'll actually happen because I think people still need subsistence to live and pay their rent and groceries. But man, if there is some sort of mutiny like that, would the system be able to contain something like that? Gosh, it'd be incredible.
They're just gonna they're just gonna print money. They're gonna do
Yeah,
universal basic income.
they'll do whatever they
Um,
need to do.
yep, yeah, they'll just keep kicking the can down the road, and I think we'll always be surprised at how far they can keep kicking the can down the road. I and unfortunately, you just have to know how to play the game, so to speak, know where to store your assets and things like Bitcoin, and educate people you care about.
Jake, talking about kicking the can down the road, let's diverge for a second. The Bitcoin
Hmm.
ETF, do you really think it's going to come through? Because I had this big argument with Matt. I'm of the opinion, no way. No way the government's going to approve a Bitcoin ETF. What do you think?
I think they are. I mean,
You really
again,
do?
I listen to, at least based on all the podcasts, news articles, the things that I listen to about it, and trust me, I spend too much time on Bitcoin Twitter and hearing all the
Mhm.
positive and negative takes. I think they're going to do it. I mean, they came out with a gold ETF. Remember, at one time the government literally banned people from holding gold, and then eventually uh, they want it. I think in a way they I think the powers that be, the government, the financial complex of Wall Street, like uh I think maybe at this point, I think they see the value proposition of Bitcoin, and they probably are going to try to leverage it in a way to just keep, they're going to try to fund
Printing.
the dumb
Yeah.
stuff they keep doing. But then the thing is, they'll realize like, oh, people, like, we can't play our games with this thing. Like it there's a fixed supply. People can self custody it. We audit the supply every 10 minutes. And I think that's going to create some interesting fireworks down the road that I'm kind of
But
excited about.
couldn't they just move to a I don't know if they could, but like once the Bitcoin ETF happens, then do you open up a can of worms where other proof of work projects can start like pleading their case too? Because I've seen some stuff, where some other proof of work projects will then like, okay, Bitcoin has an ETF, so here's our alt proof of work ETF, and then once the Chias or the Caspas or any of those other proof of works, I mean Monero will never get an ETF. Let's be frank there, but other proof of work projects get their ETF, and then the Ethereum community, they're pretty loud. They start banging on the table, and then proof of stake gets an ETF. I just think then everybody's going to get an ETF in some way, shape, or form eventually, because like you said, it'll just give government another opportunity to hide trillions more dollars.
Yeah, or the government wants to make money off of capital gains because people will trade in and out of those
Mm-hmm.
ETFs. They'll make money that way. BlackRock and the funds want to make money from their management fees. There's the incentives are in place for them to do that. And I think Bitcoin in relation to the other cryptos, I think Bitcoin's just going to keep taking over pretty much the
Okay.
entire crypto world. Like that's if I were to make a bet, I'm not a betting dude, but like that's where I would see it going over the years.
With your YouTube channel, Jake, I was kind of looking at some of your nascent stage videos. Were you trying to be the Christian Graham Stephan or something along those lines initially when you
Yeah,
kind of
I
started your
would
channel?
say yeah. So like I had a lot of success with my church run YouTube channel, which that's what I started building like 6, 7 years ago. So I'm like, okay, I figured out this YouTube thing. And then around 2020, that's when I really got into finance YouTube because trying to solve these problems for myself. And I just like finance, economics, all these things. And I'm like, there's nobody speaking to these things from a
A
more
Christian. Yep.
faith-based standpoint other than someone like Dave Ramsey kind of does, but
I
not
liked
really. He's
your
just giving.
video. I liked your spoof video of the Dave Ramsey interview where you just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
a whole bunch of altcoins, and I was just like,
Yep.
oh, that's hilarious. So
Yeah,
that
that was
that was
fun,
real.
fun editing
But
that
then
one
I
together.
noticed like your evolution of your channel shifted as you just kind of got more like, okay, I need to talk about what I'm actually
Mhm.
passionate about here, right? Is that essentially what happened?
Yeah, exactly. Because it gets to a point where I think I realized real quickly that you can get views and all that stuff on YouTube being like more making like more trading videos. And I was like, really quickly, I was like, I just no desire to be a trader, to learn trading, to do that. Like that's just not good use. That's not a use in my time. I'm not passionate about it. I don't feel like I'm called to it. And so I just like took a break. And now that channel has become kind of my more just like personal passion outlet of whatever I'm interested in. Right now, I'm just really interested in Bitcoin. I like literally, I work all day on my main business, which I really love that. I'm passionate about it. And then when I'm not working on that, I'm like listening to Bitcoin podcasts, learning more about it. Because it really, again, after 3 stinking years of like being down this rabbit hole, like I'm only more excited about it than I was 3 years ago. Like, sometimes you go into new interests and you're like, oh, like it's cool for a few months or maybe a year, and then you kind of move on to the next thing. Uh, that's not the case with my passion in understanding Bitcoin because I still feel like I really have a lot more to learn about how the actual protocol works. Again, I understand it really mostly from the economic standpoint. Um, but I don't know, just from like and all the tech they're building on top of it, right? Like all of us understand what the internet is and how it's essential to our everyday life. But like, do you know the code and how to program the internet? It's like maybe you guys do. I don't, right? But and that's where I see Bitcoin going. Like I feel like right now, when I look at my parents' generation, I'm like, man, what was it like growing up in the 70s and 80s when the first personal computers were coming out, and then you saw like when you were about my age in your 30s, the internet come about, and all these Google start up and Facebook and like and Apple started getting huge. Like to me, that's kind of the looking at Bitcoin. Um, that's what I feel like we're in, but for like the financial industry right now. Like that's in that's the that's why I'm like, people wake up. Like there's so much opportunity right here to start learning about this now. Cause I do think in 20 years, Bitcoin will be trading at like a couple $1 million per coin. And there's still going to be people who doubt it. But like at the same time, uh, or maybe not. It's like your grandma's going to have Bitcoin on her, in her retirement fund or balance sheet, right? Like in the same way that grandma thought an iPhone was crazy back in 2008, but now she has an iPhone.
Let me ask you this, because this is where I diverge from Bitcoiners. Um, so you mentioned people building things on top of Bitcoin, which I think is super interesting. So to me, do you see Bitcoin as just purely a financial instrument, or do you think it can be like the underlying base code of what is essentially a future global internet like 2.0 in a way? Because that's what I've seen Ethereum doing. And as a Christian, we talked about a lot of financial censorship issues. Well, there's also a lot of just data censorship issues, with these big tech companies like social media, Facebook, Google, but also even just like the foundation of the internet with like domain name registrars will get taken away from people if they don't like the content you're posting. Servers, Amazon web server will shut you down. You don't have a place to host, your content. So
Yeah.
when I look at the wide world of the internet and tech, I see a lot of issues that could be solved with maybe some sort of decentralizing tool. And
Hmm.
I actually do think that Bitcoin could be that tool if we could start building things on top of it. And sometimes I feel some pushback from Bitcoiners on that, on that point. Like, do
Yeah,
you
I know.
see any
I think
value in
I
these
think
things?
people, yeah, as long as like the base protocol does not change because it works
Yeah.
as in terms of storing and moving value around on
Mhm.
the internet over the network. And then yeah, there's other layers that the Lightning Network and
Mhm.
the apps on top of that. Um, like the thing about I'm not a huge the reason why I'm not that excited about like Web3 and other crypto and stuff like that is because I feel like they're solving problems that aren't really that big of a deal that our existing Web 2.0 does it much more efficiently. Like there's some places where you do need decentralization and it's great, but there's other use cases where it's okay. It's more convenient and efficient to have centralization.
Mhm.
Um, like think about uh, something like YouTube. It's like it's centralized on Google servers, and it's like an amazing platform that's able to quickly serve up content to where it needs to go. Yes, YouTube can censor that content. They have, right, and that's a pain in the butt. But to me, the way that has gotten decentralized is okay. Now there's a Rumble. Like you
Mhm.
can, go over to Rumble if YouTube kicks you off, and people have significant followings on Rumble. So I think the free market itself is inherently decentralizing already, and you don't always have to implement the decentralization at like the protocol level for every single thing that's out there.
That's what I was
Um,
saying. We don't have to copy and paste Web 2 onto Web 3.
hmm hmm
And it
Yeah,
happens way
guys,
too
just
much.
well, because the other thing too is like I think the reason why a lot of these platforms like Facebook and YouTube and have been so successful is because of that network adoption effect that happens on each of those platforms. And they're because of free market forces that are properly incentivizing those companies to steward their assets well and their customers and their content creators well, they grow and flourish. And as soon as they start to abuse that, they're going to have more competition, or users are going to leave. Like I don't know, people are always I get people are complaining about big tech and like
Mhm.
these big companies. At the same time, like it could get bad enough where advertisers will just stop spending money. Like look at Elon Musk has to deal with that with Twitter, or users just start moving to another platform. Like there is still a free market out there amidst the different platforms that I think has a decentralizing effect on them.
Yeah, I do agree with you. Not everything needs to be decentralized.
No.
But I guess I do have the opinion. This is why I still dabble in crypto, that certain things can benefit, from decentralization. Just like an example is the concept of decentralized identity. And this isn't just happening in Web3. This Bitcoin was talking about is this, there's other, tech solutions that are talking about this, but we've kind of just taken it for granted, going back to the beginning of the internet, that every platform is essentially its own silo. And if you want to create an account on Facebook, you log in, you create, and then they own your identity there. And then when they ban you, all that social credit, all those followers you built, everything is just gone. And
Yep.
it's
Yep.
it's possible we could build a system. The tech exists. We could build a system where you own your identity with some sort of decentralized, Web3 would call it a token. Other people have some other solutions, but in the same way that you have your own Bitcoin wallet and that's your identity and nobody can take that away from you.
And
Perhaps we could.
that's what Nostr does, right?
Right,
Yes.
exactly,
Yep.
totally.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
Nostra's
Yep.
a Bitcoin centric solution, to that kind of same
yeah.
problem. But if you own that identity and then every platform you go to, you just log in with the identity that you personally own. And yeah, they can say, okay, you can't interact, I guess, with our platform or community, but you own that piece, so maybe we can decentralize that in some way. And that's honestly the only reason I play with crypto. Like, I don't think Ethereum is ever going to be a better monetary system than Bitcoin. And so it's just, and it's a different opinion, but I think at least people can see where I'm kind of deriving my values from, and we share. And all right, let me tie it back into, I think, some of the conversations we're having here. Like, I see actually a lot of value in Bitcoin maxis, a lot of value in libertarians. Like, we share so many of the same concerns, Christians, whatnot, with all these different cultures. And even if I disagree, in small issues with these different groups, I think when we start to compare values, it's like, oh, we're kind of actually all saying the same thing. And we kind of want to see the same future, one where we can live with our families and not, we can practice our religion and whatnot. So my question to you then is, what do you think, what is Bitcoin culture? And is it really this thing where, oh, anybody can just, come and, bring their own value system to it? Or do you kind of have to adopt Bitcoin and homeschooling, Bitcoin and Christianity, Bitcoin and, libertarianism, kind of these anti-statist approaches? And I do think, I kind of see both sides to it, but I don't have a lot in common with radical leftists, to be frank, and I don't really see how they can participate in Bitcoin without adopting, some sort of Bitcoin culture. So do you, I mean, what do you think? Is there a Bitcoin culture, and what is it?
I would say it's a culture of personal responsibility, having sovereignty, which I guess if you look up the definition of sovereignty, I think of someone who has control or such over their life, right? Supreme personal, supreme power or authority, right? Like to govern, like sovereignty over your own life, to govern yourself. Like, I don't need to be governed by outside forces, right? So that I think is the common thing amidst the Bitcoiner culture is this idea of sovereignty, responsibility. Don't trust. You don't have to trust others. You can verify, especially at a non-local level, right? There's as much as we like to say, don't trust, verify. It's like, well, yeah, there are certain relationships in life where you just trust people, right? Like, you can't you can't verify certain things about friends or spouse or family members. Like, you
Right.
just trust that they are true to their word and stuff like that in certain areas. But what's cool is you can leverage the technology to kind of trust them, but also verify they don't, do something malicious, like, having multi-sig wallet setups. You can do some cool stuff there. So so that's where it's like, when you're like, okay, I'm not going to outsource my savings to the state, because that's what we do when we hold our savings in dollars and we put them in a savings account. We're outsourcing it both to the bank and the state, and the bank gets a make more fiat dollars by lending out that money with fractional reserve banking, and then the state is devaluing those dollars by just printing more of them. It's not really a good deal for anybody, or at least it is for the government and the banks, but not for us. So why, if I'm not going to outsource my monetary energy and my monetary reserves to the state, why would I want to outsource the raising my child to the state? Right. That's how we get to the homeschool conversation. Why would I want to outsource my healthcare to the state? A lot of when you go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, you just start kind of like learning, like there's so many facets to it. I feel like I'm the healthiest I've ever been because I've been going down this Bitcoin rabbit hole for the past 3 years. It's really changed my diet, my fitness, yeah, just especially like my wife like gets us raw milk now. Like we're just like, I don't know, just things that you never thought of, or like I really like eating steak and carnivore diet, and um, it because it's like, okay, like I'm not going to trust our government with what I eat, like in the food supply, because the government, as they inflate money, they're trying to keep food prices lower, so they create more processed food, and that's bad for us, and that's why so many people get cancer and disease and heart disease and obesity. It's like, big, I love the book, the Fiat Standard by Saifedean, because that really highlights all these areas where how the money's corrupted everything. So once you learn that as a Bitcoiner, you learn how money pretty much corrupts every area of life. Um, then that's why it seeps into it is a culture. It seeps into all aspects of your life. Um,
Yeah.
and I'd be interested. Like it would be cool to see more of the thought on this. Thank God for Bitcoin guys jam on this in their book a little bit, but how has that fiat mindset, money printer, caused issues in the church, right? And I do feel like being someone who like my business like is in the church world, so I see a lot of churches and just seeing a lot of very high time preference decisions made in churches these days. It's a sad thing because we're not thinking about the church over time, like
Yeah.
centuries. That's one thing I think Roman Catholics do pretty well. But Protestants, especially these days, are just like, man, I'm just thinking about church this Sunday and that's it, and putting on the production or the show, or um, we don't need a nice, timeless building. We can just put it in a black box and
Yeah.
call it good.
Well, that's the non-denoms having that at their local performing arts center. So it's all,
Hmm.
yeah,
Well, and
that's
how
all.
often too do you see a great ministry it does a lot of good and then there's no successor
Yep.
and the
Yep.
ministry's gone. It's like
Yep.
every ministry lasts one generation and then it's gone.
Yep.
Mhm. As we kind of, okay, so everything you're talking about, subculture related, have you kind of dove into any of Balaji's network state?
A little bit. I think I read that book, probably half of it. I'm the type that I'm like, I'll read I'll read a couple chapters in a book, and
Yep.
if I'm like fired up about it, I'll read it to the end. Like the last book I did that was Broken Money by Lynn Alden. I think that was an amazing
Mhm.
book. But then, uh, actually, then I listened to on my road trip here, Same as Ever by Morgan Housel. He's the guy who wrote Psychology of Money. That was another good one. But Network State was one of the ones, unfortunately, probably the 90% of books I buy and pick up that I'm like, I read 25% of it. I'm like, oh, okay, it's good. I get the point. I'm not going to read the rest of it.
Yeah,
Um,
no,
but
that's how
I
I
thought it
felt
was,
about it similarly.
I thought it was, I mean, I think the concept is definitely valid. And yeah, I think that could be where we're heading. Um, I would love it. I would love it if the network state kind of dematerializes all the existing, in real life states that we have. It'd be awesome.
Yeah, I figured you'd align with that a little bit, which is why I wanted to
Mhm.
ask that question because
Yeah.
it's good. It was definitely like libertarianism too. Like it was like, and
Yep.
Gosh, that would have been a cool conference to go to in Amsterdam, but we
Well,
can't
people like,
be everywhere.
yeah, and I think people are underestimating right now with Bitcoin the value proposition of being able to store your wealth in a network and you're not tied down to a local
Right.
jurisdiction anywhere or like a nation state. Like that's just a big deal. Like even though like again, I'm not like a gazillionaire, right? I feel like you know, I have a healthy small business and but over time I can see how as things compound, like when I get into my 50s, 60s, 70s, I'm like, wow, this is gonna like I'm gonna have like I'm gonna have a decent chunk of capital that's just
You're
grown from
scalable. Yeah,
compound growth, right?
you're
And
scalable.
it's amazing. Like I am starting to think of like should I consider expatriating my family from the United States to be
Cool.
like I don't want any obligation or ties to the United States anymore because the United States doesn't really serve me. It's like all I need is the internet and Bitcoin, and I can add value to the world and take care of my family and do my thing,
Wow.
serve my customers, serve my church. Like
Yeah.
that's where and maybe like maybe that'll be more of a thing for my kids or their kids someday. Like I think after reading the book The Sovereign Individual, did you guys read that?
I haven't read that. No.
I've heard of it.
That like that's a book like once you read it, you're like, man, I just can't see the world in
So
the same
here,
way
so
again.
Alex Becker, on his channel on YouTube, he
Hmm.
says that he has purchased citizenship, I think, in about 6 or 7 different countries in case
Yep.
everything goes to the woodshed. I think it's like what, St. Kitts, like that's where everybody starts at least in terms of getting a
Yep.
passport. That's the place. So you just like essentially buy citizenship, and so it's an interesting strategy. It's not the worst idea either.
Yeah. So I don't know. That's why I toy with the idea of like going to El Salvador or something like that, but it's
Yeah.
not. But the thing is, it's like no. I just wish there were no states at all. It's like I don't. We don't need. I don't like. I don't want to. I'm not. I don't think El Salvador is the promised land.
No,
Um, it's just. It's annoying when you start thinking about like, okay, I'm working so hard to accumulate capital, and then when I die, there's like estate taxes and inheritance taxes and all this stuff. It's like literally just like you. There's so many dang taxes. They like it's just property theft nonstop till the end of time.
wow. I
That's
did
a
not
gloomy note to end the
anticipate.
podcast on.
Yeah, I'm like this is I'm on. Yeah, this is where I think I kind of want to end things, Connor, because it's so true. And it's definitely conversations worth continuing having. And I'm glad you started bringing up the sovereignty topic, Jake, because if people want to hear more about this type of conversation in terms of sovereignty, they should really go check out more of your content. So just want to kind of give you an opportunity to show yourself and tell people where to find you.
Yeah, on Twitter, Jake Gosselin, and then a YouTube channel, Jake Gosselin. I don't really, not the one. You type my name, Jake Gosselin, you'll see the church front one. That's all the church content. Which, if you're into that, watch it. But the other one, I've been posting more about Bitcoin lately, and it's just basic videos, like because I get people like they see me talking about Bitcoin a lot on Instagram or Twitter, and they're like, "Where do I start?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, "How do I buy it?" I'm like, what you don't know how to buy Bitcoin. It's like it's such a different world, right? Like and it's funny because like that's the world like I've built my living in
Hmm.
with AVL and the church is like I'm still explaining very simple things to people who never been taught it before, and I
It's so
think that's the
easy
same
now.
thing.
It's so
It's
easy
just
now.
yeah, right. It's the same thing in the Bitcoin world. It's like it's like well, people still need to be taught the fundamentals. So I've got some videos on that, and again, maybe I'll be inspired to make some more content in the future. But Twitter is where you'll get my most recent hot takes.
That's awesome, Jake. We're going to need to have you back sometime to talk more about just what's going on today, how we can all be more sovereign in our everyday life. But this was awesome, and really appreciate you making the time to come on with us. And we hope everybody checks out Jake, and appreciate everybody for watching or listening to this edition of the Crypto Conversion Podcast, and we will see you on the next episode. Peace.